Okay, we are going to briefly have an introduction, the statement of the problem, objectives, research questions, some hypotheses, discussion, and then we conclude. For introduction, we are taking a quote by Professor Kwesi Kwapra, who is the founder of CASAS, the Center for Advanced Studies of African Society. He makes the statement that no country can make progress on the basis of a borrowed language, which means that we cannot go ahead, we cannot be developed, we cannot progress if we are using or we are based or we are mainly using a language that is not ours indigenously. That is where there is a need to develop our African languages and use them as well, because once we develop, we have to use them. If you don't use a language, you don't speak it, it's going to die. For a very long period of time, information technology, movies, and marketing were done mainly in English, French, and even in Hindi, because we had Indian movies that we loved so many years ago. The African continent relied a lot on foreign languages in the business world. When we want to buy, maybe from China, want to buy from the US, want to buy designer bags or whatever, we use English, we use French, we use Chinese, we use other languages and not ours, because those were the languages, or those are the languages that rule. That is, we used to say that English is the language for technology, because most whatever you have on your computer screen is mostly English and sometimes translated in French. So we dwelled a lot on it, and even our movies that we watched and the ones that we act in English, we act in French. But we are going to see that the story is changing with the coming of cinema and artificial intelligence. What made us come up with this research? We had observed that our African languages do not have enough exposure to technology and media as a whole. When you go to your computer screen, you don't have some work that has been translated in Yemba, no text that has been written in Mungaka, no movie that has been acted solely in Mokwe or in Wondo. You know, most of those have been English, French, Hindi, Chinese, and all of that. So the researcher thought it necessary to investigate ways in which our African languages can be developed and be projected to the world. Because for us to grow, for us to develop our languages have to be worldwide. Let people know what we are, let people like what we have, just like we also like what they have and what they are. We have three objectives. The first one is to foster development of poorly endowed African languages. The second, to facilitate the acquisition of poorly endowed African languages. And the third one, to find the link between language development and cinema through artificial intelligence. We also have three research questions. The first one is, how can poorly endowed African languages be developed? The second one is, how can cinema facilitate language acquisition? And the third one is, how can artificial intelligence be explored in achieving language development and language acquisition. So to answer these questions, we came up with 3 hypotheses, possible solutions. The first possible solution was that African movies will facilitate the development of African languages. And the second one is the acquisition of African languages will be faster through African movies. And the third one is artificial intelligence will help to accelerate the development and acquisition processes of African languages. Now let us begin the discussion, and we're going to begin by defining what we mean by poorly endowed African languages. These are languages that maybe lack sufficient resources, like a writing system. We have a lack of an explicit grammar. We have lack of IT, that's information technology applications, among others. Those are poorly endowed languages. And we see that most of our African languages, even our Cameroonian languages to be specific, do not have these, some of them are not standardized. They do not have writing systems so that we could have them in our films, have them in software, and have them in some documents. So, yeah. Looking at the first hypothesis that we talked about, where we say African movies will facilitate the development of African languages. How would they do that? First, we need to know that development is growth and expansion. For anything or anyone to develop, you need to grow and you need to expand. So our languages will have to grow and they need to expand. That means that we need to have a writing system, we need to have them standardized, we need to have them written, documented, we need to have books in our African languages. We need to have movies that are acted in our African languages. That means a whole movie in Yamba, a whole movie in Owondo. Not only translating an English movie in Owondo, but acted in the language that we, for example, we see Chinese movies and Indian movies. They are acted in their languages. And when you watch them, you like the movie, and you pick up some of those small statements that catch the eye or catch the ear, and you learn the language. It makes you like a language, and when you have love for a language, it's easier to learn it. Now, the second point is many people will be exposed to African languages through cinema. Now, when we act in the languages that we speak in Africa, others will be, I'm not going to say that they will be forced, they would watch in the languages that we speak, they are going to admire it. It's going to be watched not only in Africa, but in other continents, and it's going to expose our language, and that exposure gives it growth and expansion. And the third one is that it's going to provide our African languages with visibility and value. Now, we value English, we value French, we value Hindi, we value Chinese because they have been exposed to us, because we have medications where the instructions have been written in those languages, and we have to learn to read them, and we use those languages. So we value the language. We see how important those languages are in our daily lives. Now, if we replace those with our African languages, that value, not that it's going to replace the European languages, but it's also going to add to the value. Fight with African languages is not to replace, but to add the value, because we cannot delete what has already been there. It's just to add our value to what is already in place. Looking at the second hypothesis, which states that the acquisition of African languages will be faster through African movies, we have the first point which says language acquisition is the ability to learn and to use language, just as we have said before. Now, when you learn a language and you don't use it, the language is going to die, because languages also die. When people don't use it with their children, it dies. When we don't document those languages, they die. And when we stop using it, they also die. So language acquisition is going to help help us to learn to use those languages. Even those who cannot speak, let's say that you cannot speak Ewono, you cannot speak Yemba. Now with cinema, when you're watching, you like it, you can relate, and the picture sticks in your brain, in your mind, and it's easier for you to link what is said and what is being done. That makes language acquisition faster. Now, movies appeal to people's emotions. When we watch movies, they're entertaining, they're interesting, and a lot of research has been done in this aspect, and it has been discovered that many people learn a lot with what is visual, what they see. We could also learn with interacting, mingling with people who speak that language. And it's also a very good platform. The movie is a very good platform where we meet those languages. We like what is being said, and we try to learn it. It's easier to learn what you can see, what you can relate to, than what is abstract, what you can only imagine. So these movies bring those imaginations to light. They bring it to life and makes it easier for us to acquire our African languages. And it's also a great way for us to use them, because when we watch those movies and we're trying to narrate the movies, we narrate in those, our African languages. And we are also saying that the movies add context to language learning. Now, whatever you have learned in language, vocabulary, grammar, maybe tenses or whatever you have learned, past tense, present tense, the context reminds you, prompts those things, and you'll be able to use it better. Now, if I am saying that the past tense of talk is taught, those are abstract things, those are grammar rules that we have kept in the mind. Yes, we are going to keep it, cram it, but if we brought it to life, like somebody using it in the present, somebody using it in the past, somebody using it in the future, says that we'll talk, talked, I talk, and you see the statement in a particular context, the learning is faster, the learning is better when you can visualize it. That's why we say that the African movies will help in the acquisition of our African languages if we use our African languages to act those movies. The third hypothesis, which was artificial intelligence, will help accelerate the development and acquisition processes of African languages. We have 3 points under that. The first one is subtitling and voiceovers. The artificial intelligence we are looking at here are not the images that are generated, but the subtitles that are generated, the voiceovers that are generated. Now, when the actors speak and there is a translation under, it helps the language learner to easily identify what is being said, how it's pronounced, how it's spelled, and language learning is faster. Now, if we look at the voiceovers in voiceovers in AI movies, we see that you identify more with the actor. That means you feel your emotions are intact. The actor that you know that speaks a particular language or has a particular voice, it stays that way. You will not hear Ukwa with a verb, because I've seen some movies where they translated and you hear Ukwa with a voice that is almost feminine, or you hear somebody who you know has a very deep voice and maybe you've been admiring that deep voice, and in one translated movie he has a very small squeaky voice. It takes away that interest. So with these voiceovers, the voices remain intact, and you can easily identify with them, and the enjoyment would be intact. Now let's take the example of The Gods Must Be Crazy, a 1980 movie. The Gods Must Be Crazy had an actor, I've forgotten his name, a Bushman. He spoke only in that African language from the beginning to the end, but the other actors spoke in English. And if we notice, his speech was never translated. There were no subtitles on that. So we could only imagine that in this context, this is what he was trying to say. In this context, this is what he meant to say. So, but if we had a subtitle, or we had a voiceover, it would have made more sense. Now, let's also look at one very popular Indian movie in 1985, Terry Meher Baniyan. This movie was popularly known as The Revenge of the Indian Dog. Now, the first time I watched it, that was the title that came to my head, and nobody had told me that that's what it was called. And a neighbor also who had watched it, that was the title that came to their head. And you see that every other person who had watched it came up with the title, The Revenge of the Indian Dog. Now, I don't know what Terry Meher Baniyan meant, but that was the title that was there. It was not in English. We were the ones who said, okay, because this dog is revenging the death of his master, that would be the title. And the movie was solely in Hindi. So we could only imagine, we liked the movie, we enjoyed it, and we could learn some Indian words, Indian sentences, Indian statements. We could enjoy it, but we did not know exactly what they were saying because the full movie was in Hindi. But the introductory, how do we call those captions, they were all in English, and even the conclusion captions were all in English, but the movie was entirely Hindi. Now in 2001, we had Mr. Bones, which was a South African movie. A part of it was acted in South Africa. There we had subtitles. That is the difference. The other ones were in 1985, and you see how far we have gone. In 2021, we now have subtitles. The actors who spoke in the African languages had their speech translated in subtitles on that, so we could relate with the movie and we could enjoy along with those who created the movie. So I'm trying to say that what artificial intelligence is doing with subtitles and voiceovers, very important and very good for language learning, language development, and that we have progressed from where we were so many years ago. Now, to conclude, we have seen that from The Gods Must Be Crazy, which was 1980, The Revenge of the Indian Dog, 1985, to Mr. Bones, 2001, where we had subtitles, we see that the African cinema has progressed. We have moved ahead. And now with the artificial intelligence, we are going to move even further. I would like to also say that our African languages are already in the process of being in the computer interface. That means that Mozilla Common Voice has a project that includes all languages, no matter the continent. And some of our African languages have been worked on. I was part of the team where we worked on 31 African languages. And by December this year, we will now have those African languages in the computer interface. That means that when you want to use AI, maybe to generate a language in Yemba, in Mokwe, in which other language was there? In Bassa, it's going to come up. So we have moved another step further. So the AI is not only limited to those images that are generated by satellite and all of that, but in a few months to come, we are also going to have our African languages in the computer interface, which I think it's a very important, or it's a very good step, very great step for us. So we'll have subtitles in our Cameroonian language or in African languages, because we're also participants from other countries. So we'll have subtitles in our African languages, and we'll also have voiceovers in our African languages. So in one sentence, I would like to say that developing our African languages and learning our African languages through cinema is possible and very good. And cinema makes it easier for us to learn our African languages if we use or if we act those movies in our African languages with the help of artificial intelligence. Thank you.